Net neutrality is at the top of the progressives' wish list this year, and now the FCC is ready to grant this wish just before Christmas. Seton Motley has the details. He's the editor-in-chief of StopNetRegulation.org and the president of Less Government. Seton, how bad is this, and what is the government trying to do?
It's a pretty bad deal, Judge. How are you?
Good, thanks.
There's basically two facets of net neutrality with which we have to be concerned. There's tiered pricing, which the left is against, and discrimination of content, which they are for. Let's talk about discrimination of content first.
Right.
First, okay, you and I live next door to one another. You're downloading a movie. I'm updating my Twitter account. At that moment, you need more internet than I do. So the internet service provider manages the network. They give you more internet than I get. You're done with your movie. They move it over here. Comcast gets 1 million URL requests a second.
All right, what does the government want to do to this relationship?
They say you can't do that. They say you can't manage the network. It's socialism for the internet. Everybody gets equal amounts of nothing. They try to say that no matter what you're doing, you cannot get any more bandwidth than the person next to you. It's like saying to the fire department, that house is on fire, that house is brushing its teeth. They get the same amount of water.
Okay, all right, a couple of questions. First of all, as I read the law, the FCC has zero authority to regulate the internet. Secondly, the internet is so free, so pure free market, it has worked with near perfection without any government involvement whatsoever.
Net neutrality is a solution running around looking for a problem. You're exactly right. The last time Congress addressed communications policy, it was the 1996 Act, and the chairman of the FCC, Julius Genachowski himself, told the Washington Post a little over a month ago that the Communications Act does not address broadband. The courts in April have already told the FCC they do not have the authority under the current regulatory scheme, and yet they're going ahead with this vote anyway.
All right, and they're going ahead with the vote about 3 days before Christmas, when the Congress will be gone, when the federal courts will be closed, when 90% of the country will be occupied with other things. They're just going to sort of spring this on us.
It's a last-minute, under cover of Christmas, spring upon the American people, not unlike last year's Christmas Eve vote on health care. This is another one of those, let's sneak it in under the door when no one's looking.
All right, what can we do about it, other than somebody filing a lawsuit to a federal court of appeals in Washington, which would probably prevail? What can we do between the time they spring this on us and the time the court opens its doors?
The Congressional Review Act is the best way to deal with this. In the Congress, in the new Congress in January, they have 60 days from the time of the vote. What they can do is it's a simple vote in the House, the majority rules. In the Senate, all it takes is 30 senator signatures. It gets on the floor. It's also not filibusterable, which means you don't need 60. All you need is 51, which means 47 Republicans. You need to get 4 of the 23 Democrats that are up for re-election.
So what we really need to do is make sure everybody knows to tell their representatives in both houses of the Congress, this is a monstrosity waiting to destroy our freedom, and it is very easy to stop. Seton Motley, thank you very much. Please stay on top of this for us. It's a very, very serious issue. The feds working to stop terror attacks, but are their actions constitutional? Next. Questions surrounding tactics used by the feds in the recent arrest of alleged terrorists in Baltimore and Portland. Both cases, the feds provided the young men with fake bombs in order to carry out fake attacks. In both cases, the men were seeking support from radical Muslim groups. And in both cases, the men were charged with using an attempted weapon of mass destruction. But did the feds overstep their bounds? Joining me now from Atlanta, Georgia, is attorney, former congressman, and former federal prosecutor, Bob Barr. Bob, we see this over and over and over again. The FBI goes out and finds a weak link, usually a person who who's unstable, and they talk him into committing a crime. They lead him to believe he's going to commit the crime. They get him to say all kinds of incriminating things on tape. They stop him before he can commit the crime. In fact, the crime is usually impossible because what he thinks is a bomb is filled with sawdust. How does the government decide who to target, who to go after when it does these things?
It's a very good question, Judge. Frequently, they'll go after the easy target, and some of these folks, I think it's the Baltimore defendant, in this case, Martinez, was posting things on Facebook that initially led the FBI to him. Well, one can presume that somebody that's stupid enough to start talking about engaging in terrorist acts on Facebook probably is not real bright, probably doesn't know what he's doing, and probably is not a real terrorist to begin with. That's not the kind of person they ought to be focusing on. What they ought to be focusing on is those that on which we have good, sound foreign intelligence coming in that is properly analyzed and disseminated.
And when they pick these dupes and they plant the seed of the crime, and then they get them to say all kinds of things, and then they bring them to the scene and they lead them to believe they're going to commit a crime which is impossible to commit. How can they charge somebody with committing a crime that's impossible to commit? You can't blow up sawdust. Now, they thought it was petrol, but it was sawdust.
It's a tactic that's been around for a long time, Judge, but it's taken on new urgency in terms of whether or not Congress and the American people ought to be satisfied with this sort of thing. What they do is they'll basically rope somebody in. It's virtually impossible to claim entrapment these days with the way court decisions have gone, but they'll rope somebody in, as you say, the weak link in all of this. It's impossible for the person to commit the crime, but what they can do then is get them with a conspiracy or an attempt, and in the area of these terrorism laws, those penalties can be a life sentence regardless of whether it was impossible or not.
Big picture, and we only have about 30 seconds left. Does this keep us safe when they do this? Does this keep society safer?
No, there are much better things that they need to be doing to keep us safer. And Congress, Judge, ought to look into some of these issues with the new folks coming in. They've not looked at the entrapment defense, the impossibility defense, where the FBI is allocating its resources. These are questions that Congress needs to engage some oversight on.
Well, I hope it does. I hope the defenses of entrapment work, and I hope the people realize that the government doesn't always keep us safe. Bob Barr, it's a pleasure. An early Merry Christmas to you. Final thoughts next. Does the government work for us, or do we work for the government? Are our natural rights that are guaranteed by the Constitution really guaranteed, or are they subject to the whims of politicians and the wishes of bureaucrats? We began this year with a tumultuous debate over the federal government's power to regulate health care. The president and the Democrats in Congress crafted a 2,300-page law that no one in the Congress read, that forces Americans to purchase health insurance whether they want it or not, that compels the states to raise taxes and tells them how to spend the money that they've raised, and that micromanages insurance companies. During the debate over this bill, I asked Congressman Jim Clyburn, the number 3 ranking Democrat in the House of Representatives and the person in charge of getting the health care bill passed in the House, just where in the Constitution the federal government is authorized to manage health care. He replied by telling me that most of what Congress does is not authorized by the Constitution. This should come as a surprise to no one. I applaud him for his candor, but I condemn his violation of his oath to uphold the Constitution. The Constitution is the supreme law of the land. It is the rule of law. It was written to establish, define, and restrain the federal government. It was also written to compel the government to guarantee our freedoms. Jefferson wrote that our freedoms come from our Creator. If he was right, and I believe he was, then our freedoms are as natural to us as our fingers. And since our freedoms don't come from the government can't take them away. As this year comes to a close, we have witnessed a ray of hope for fidelity to the Constitution. That same massive 2,300-page law that the House passed last Christmas Eve was just declared unconstitutional this week by a federal judge in Virginia. This is just one ruling by one judge, and there are many more to come. But this judge courageously did what judges are supposed to do. When the Congress enacts laws not authorized by the Constitution, it is the duty of the courts to invalidate those laws, no matter how noble may Congress's purpose be. If it is without power to do as it has done, the law is invalid. Were this not so, then Congress could write any law, regulate any behavior, and tax any event, and our freedoms and our property would be lost to the tyranny of the majority in Congress. When he wrote the Constitution, James Madison famously said that if men were angels, there would be no need for a government or a constitution. We know that men are not angels, and we know that most members of the Congress are not faithful to the Constitution. And we rejoice when a single federal judge stops them in their tracks. The government has no legitimate authority under the Constitution to force us to purchase health care or to punish us when we don't. Health insurance is a good, not a right. Free people decide what goods to acquire for themselves. The government's job is to protect our rights. We at Fox News, and you in your daily lives, are on the battle lines of the future for freedom every day. But for just a moment at this time of year, we should pause and remember an event that happened 2,000 years ago in the Middle East. A light seared through the darkness. A baby was born in a cave. The Word was made flesh and dwelt among us. The baby came into the world so that we might have life and have it abundantly. The baby came into the world so that we would be set free from our own sin, free from the temptations of the world, and free from the governments that seek to control us. The baby was the Son of God and the Prince of Peace and the Savior of the world. His birthday is next week. From New York, defending freedom, Merry Christmas, America.